Welcome to On the Edge. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to go to Bangkok. Talk to J.S Kim of SmartKnowledgeU.com. John, welcome back to On the Edge.
Thank you, Max. It's good to be back.
All right, John, before LIBOR, most commentators dismissed such conspiracies as a preposterous notion. Now we know that, of course, manipulating LIBOR rates and other interest rates is endemic throughout the system around the world. But the question is, now that global interest rates have been exposed as a fraud and manipulation is rife, is it a far stretch to now understand finally that price of gold and silver are also manipulated?
No, not at all. I think the LIBOR scandal is a great thing as far as getting exposure for those that claim that gold and silver are being manipulated. Because, I think, Max, if we look at the history, we have documentation from the U.S. Federal Reserve itself from dating back from 1975, when then Fed Chairman Arthur Burns basically admitted to, sent a memo to the President of the United States at the time, admitting to gold price suppression. And then, we had 20 years later, 1995, where again, there are documents that prove the Federal Reserve engaged in gold swaps, either between other central banks or with other bullion banks. So, the evidence has always been there. It's just the fact that people have been slow to recognize the fact that's been manipulated. And I think certainly the LIBOR scandal will contribute to, mass media acceptance of gold and silver manipulation. At least I hope it will.
Yeah, in the memo written from Arthur Burns to Richard Nixon after Nixon went off the gold standard in 1971, he explicitly says that if you want to do this, if you want to go to a pure fiat money system, you will have to manipulate the price of gold down, make sure that that price of gold cannot trade freely, because then it'll upset your whole scheme for a purely fiat money system. And that's set in motion 40 years of fraud, and now we've got the current global crisis as a result of it. Now, John, prior to the LIBOR crime being exposed, you wrote a blueprint to kill J.P. Morgan's alleged massive manipulation in silver. So walk us through this.
Sure. Well, it goes along a lot of the lines of your buy an ounce of silver, kill J.P. Morgan campaign as well. I've been telling people since 2006 that the way we can end this fraudulent banking and monetary system is simply to buy physical gold and physical silver. And the physical silver market, if you look at it, there's only about 1 billion ounces of supply every year, Max. And out of those billion ounces of silver, since silver has industrial uses and other uses as well, there's only about 260, 270 million ounces of physical silver available to retail and institutional investors like you and me. But as we all know, on the COMEX, it's so fraudulent that sometimes they'll trade 250 million ounces of paper silver in a minute. And in fact, they basically average about 100 million ounces of paper silver every day. So we're talking about, that 270, 280 million ounces of silver that's available to, retail and institutional investors for the entire year being traded every 2.8 days. So, the way to break that scandal, to get people to realize that there's a huge, huge gap between the perception of silver supply and the reality of silver supply, is simply to buy physical silver. And in that regard, say we take just 5% of the 1.3 billion Chinese, if we just ask them to buy 1 ounce of silver at $28 an ounce, that will consume 6% of the annual global silver supply. If we take a country like Japan, ask every single person in Japan to buy 1 ounce of silver, we're going to be taking about 40 to 45% of the global annual silver supply off the table. And you could basically extend that same analogy to physical gold. So obviously, those contractions in annual supply will cause gold and silver to boom in price, and then if you look at an analogy to the Wizard of Oz, it will draw back the curtain and expose the fraud.
Right, and these countries that you mentioned, they have recently vocalized their opposition to lending America the cash to sustain the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency, because invariably that money goes into weapons that are used in turn to attack these various countries. And so one way that these countries could defeat the arms buildup against them would be to deflate the paper Ponzi scheme that supports the U.S. military. And another thing to mention, the volume of silver on the COMEX and around the world every day is an incredible aberration in terms of the annual production of silver. So you've got the annual production of silver being 1 billion ounces, and you're seeing that turnover 2 or 3 times a month, that amount. And what we find out, and we now know, is that a large percentage of the trading in these futures markets are what are called wash trades. This is a simultaneous buy and sell at a price below the market. So if silver is at 28.5, a simultaneous buy and sell at 26. This will create the illusion that the price is at 26. It'll create a print on the tape at 26, and it'll trigger markets to react, and possibly some more volume will come in. So this is outright manipulation, but it's been covered now by mainstream media. Bloomberg just covered this and said these automated high-frequency wash trades are distorting these markets around the world. Now, John, you also wrote on your blog, The Criminal Banking Cartel's Endgame, a 100% digital monetary system. Explain, and how is it related to the silver manipulation?
I think that their end goal, as in every crisis they create, is actually to consolidate their power, to gain more power over the monetary system. We see that in, the forced collapse of banking competitors, and that there are fewer and fewer global banks now controlling all the capital markets and real estate, stocks, commodities, and so forth. And I think they want that same control over us, the people. And the way to do that, of course, is to turn money. I mean, already probably like 98% of all money is digital, but people can still fight that in the fact that if they view physical gold and physical silver as money, as they should properly, they can convert their fiat currency into that, or they can still hold cash. But of course, if they get rid of all cash, then all it takes to control like a dissident or a dissenting voice is just to flip a switch on a computer and forever block that person's access to their money. So I think that is why that is their end goal.
Right. We just had that interesting case in the New York Times where a fake tweet was sent out from an editorialist at the New York Times talking about this very thing, that the Visa and MasterCard had blocked access to New York Times. This set off a firestorm on the web because we're seeing these digital money purveyors step outside of their purview as commercial interests and acting in a supra-political global manner by cutting people off, whether it's WikiLeaks, simply for their political views. And this is one of the risks of having pure digital money. Of course, with gold and silver, you can't destroy it. So how do they stop people from transacting in precious metals, or if people create their own local currencies, John?
I don't think they can. I think, if we went to a purely digital monetary system, although we're very, very close to that already, as I said, because there's very little liquid cash in the system right now, and most transactions are purely digital. But I think if that happened, then there'd always be a black market. I think a black market would form where, certain states or certain countries would actually disengage from the global system. That's one way to rebel as well. You see in the Kelantan state of Malaysia, they've actually started issuing silver dirhams and gold dinars, the Islamic currency, to fight the great devaluation of the Malaysian ringgit. Malaysian central bank came down on them. I think that happened 2 years ago in 2010, and so that money's illegal. They continue to use that money. So I think there, would be a way to rebel against that.
Yeah, I think the Malaysian example is really interesting, John. There was a YouTube video of a young man showing his gold and silver coins, actual bullion, and it comes in a plastic cellophane pocket, and it has a bit of information as to the authenticity. But this is then the currency that's used, and he was talking about how since he started transferring his savings into gold and silver, the prices in the paper money have gone up, but he still gets the exact same purchasing power with his gold and silver in terms of, I think it was one of the silver coins could buy a chicken, for example, and that had not changed over the course of this hyperinflation. Now, the government came down and said there wasn't legal currency, but the black market persists. And so the government really had no power to stop the circulation of this actual gold and silver. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think their only action would be to take military action, right? To send in soldiers and try to put that state under martial law. But then the governments, obviously the states collude with the banksters, right? To to run the state. So at that point, they got to weigh, do they want to risk violent revolution?
Right, and of course these gold and silver Malaysian coins there's the same purchasing power is maintained in any country in the world. So you could go to any country in the world with these, and still you can transact on a global market because gold and silver have been recognized as money for 5,000 years. That's not going to change. Now, John, at the University of Texas Business School, you wrote your thesis on how information flows through the media chain. Address the issue of perception versus reality and how the banksters and the media use this to control people's actions regarding finance. So, John, there seems to be a remarkable collusion, I guess you could call it, between outlets like CNBC and Wall Street, for example. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there?
Sure. Well, what I learned actually in writing my thesis, although that was a while ago, if I can recall, was that journalists actually learn to self-censor themselves. In other words, they learn what is appropriate to the bosses, what they can write, what they can report about by the quality of the assignments they receive. So in other words, if they write like a dissenting opinion that the parent company does not like, calling the fractional reserve banking system immoral, then they notice that they get assigned to lesser and lesser quality assignments and perhaps even get demoted. So then they begin to self-censor themselves that they realize they want to work themselves up the chain. So when we look at perception versus reality in the financial markets, it's extremely important because I think that the banking cartel now is not even though reality is so immoral, they're not even concerned right now with perpetuating that reality. They're really more concerned rather to perpetuate the perception of that reality because it's a false perception that people do not understand. So as long as they can control people's perceptions, then it's a much easier task to do, right, than actually having to change reality itself.
Right. It's very similar, or harkens back to the famous conference call with Enron and Wall Street, where one of the analysts questioned Enron's numbers shortly before the company imploded from massive accounting fraud. And this analyst questioned the accounting of Enron, and the response of the bank was to fire the analyst. So this is true across the whole spectrum of financial media. These reporters, if they get access to CEOs, only on the condition that they don't ask anything of any consequence. They can only ask kind of a pandering vanity questions and puff questions. Otherwise, they don't get access. And of course, no access to the star CEO means less ratings, and therefore less people are even aware of what's going on, because the media is lined up completely with the interests of the corrupt bankers. All right, so many in the Western financial media, John, are saying that a massive crash is coming for China and Asia. What's happening over there in terms of fictional economics and finance? Is it as bad as the U.S. or not? Is the China bubble meme just propaganda, or is it real?
No, this is an interesting thing. Again, I think it goes back to perception versus reality, right? Because in Asia, certainly you have in communist China, the government selling just as much propaganda to citizens as, the Western government leaders as well. So everyone in Asia thinks it's okay. So it's a matter of confidence. It's like Hank Paulson testified in 2008, who'd always say we have to uphold confidence in the markets, not that we have to solve the root of the problem, not that we have to stabilize the economy, but we have to uphold market confidence. So that's all the leaders in Asia are concerned with doing right now, because the Asian economy hasn't tanked as much as the EU economy or the US economy. So it's just a facade, Max, and I believe that the economies here will tank as well, but they just might lag by 6 months or so or 9 months or so. But there's certainly, since we all run on the same immoral fractional reserve banking system, and since credit was extended to everyone to fund this growth, we have the same problems in Asia that we have in the West. It's just a matter of the fact that the actual reality of it is going to manifest itself a little later.
Well, you're talking about, of course, one of the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China. You're saying that China, the perception management game might be running its course. On India, they just have a massive blackout of electricity affecting something like 600 million people. So is it also fair to say that the Indian growth story and the decoupling story about how these BRIC countries are going to decouple from the rest of the economy and lead, is that overhyped in your opinion, John?
Yeah, I think it is overhyped because I think it's all interconnected today, and I don't think there is really that much decoupling. And as we've seen even in India, you mentioned India, the Indian government increased the import taxes for gold when they felt their people were buying too much gold, right? Because they wanted to force them back into the Indian stock market because the Indian stock market was collapsing. So it's just a ridiculous game of perception management everywhere you go. And when that doesn't work, then they try to legislate people's behavior and prevent them from buying the very assets that will protect them.
Right. Well, you mentioned that the Indian government has clamped down on people buying gold in India. And you mentioned that the purchase of silver is a way to attack the bankers. And you mentioned that in Malaysia, they are circulating gold and silver as a currency, and the government has cracked down on this. So this is becoming a global phenomenon. People around the world are reverting back to gold and silver, and it's causing these governments to react. And so this is becoming really a global political issue. The end of this global political issue of owning gold and silver, I would just think that historically gold and silver usually, they always win in the end. I mean, you can't fight a war with nothing but paper, correct?
Correct. And that goes against, or that I should say, that returns again to the one point we talked about. And I think it's a really crucial point because I like to emphasize, the perception versus reality game is that, you and I both know, Max, it's so simple for the people to bring down this criminal banking syndicate. I mean, like, I've already mentioned if just every person in one small country, Japan, buys 1 ounce of silver, and that would basically free silver and gold from the price suppression games of the cartel. So when it's so easy to do, I've thought a lot about why don't people do it? Because obviously no one wants to be a victim, right? No one wants to be a victim to fraud, but yet we continually acquiesce and remain passive in this game when we don't take active steps to free ourselves. So I think, the major push forward from this point is that we have to educate people more about how wide their gap is between perception and reality. And if we can do that, then I think we can move people into action. But before that, I still don't think there's a large percentage of people that understand that. But before we accomplish that, I don't think we can move people, from their state of inertia into a state of action.
Well, you talk about perception, and you say nobody wants to be a victim. And therefore, buying gold and silver for people who want to escape being victimized by the paper Ponzi scheme that is the global financial system. And you're right, nobody wants to be a victim unless, of course, they're being propagandized and confused as to which party is the true victim. A lot of people believe that people buying gold and silver are victimizing the paper people, if you will. So in other words, the propaganda suggests, and we've seen this in the past also, John, governments will then begin to vilify gold and silver buyers as the perpetrators of the crime, and that the paper pushers at HSBC and Barclays and the rest of the global banking system are the victim of this crime. And again, it's a matter of perception. But isn't it true? I would think that, John, if people do what you do, which is you have 1 billion people or more buy 1 ounce of silver, you take that off the physical market, not only do you crash the paper market and crash the banksters, but the value of your silver will go up 5, 10, 15 times. So wouldn't it be in your own self-interest to see your own net worth go up? Isn't that enough to overcome any of the manipulation on the media front and the perception front? What do you think, John?
Yeah, of course, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Max. But I think the problem is that people are paralyzed, almost in a state of learned helplessness, in a state of inertia. So to get them to take the first step, a lot of times I tell people, hey, you should convert 40, 50% of your paper fiat currency to physical gold and physical silver. But that's almost too much of a shock. So then what I suggest is that, okay, start converting 2% every month. And then as you see that this will basically, at a minimum, hold your purchasing power and then over time increase their purchasing power, then start stepping into physical gold and buying more physical silver as they see, their actual purchasing power increase. So I think we can kind of prod people very gently into taking that first step, just by convert 2% and see how it goes and convert 4%. And in that way, I think, if we ask people to take baby steps, then eventually, people will begin to realize the intelligence of such a strategy.
All right, finally, John, let's talk about the crisis, right? And in its current state, we're in our 5th year, and the central banks have tried to address the problem with their quantitative easing programs and other monetary solutions, and they've all come up short. You still have deflation in the world, trumping any inflationary trends. And this causing the banks to have to write off massive parts of their balance sheets and causing the bank crisis to escalate and exposing things like HSBC's money laundering or Barclays LIBOR rigging. This is all being exposed because of this deflationary pressures that have removed the ability to paper things over with just more silly money. So where do you see this in the next 6 months? By the end of the year, will we see something more dramatic by the end of the year? In other words, one of these too big to fail banks fail and set off another chain reaction, or will it can be kicked down the road, as the saying goes, John?
It's really hard to predict where it goes. It just depends, again, if the Feds engage in more, overt quantitative easing, because I think covertly they're still engaging in quantitative easing, but whether they plan to create trillions and trillions of more dollars and then stuff it in the stock market. But there is the law of diminishing return. So, within a year, we're going to see some drastic moves. And I think we're going to see continued volatility, especially in gold and silver. But I think there's going to be days ahead when gold and silver push higher. Moves are going to come very violently and dramatically upward. But then again, we'll also see huge moves downward because, the battle that we talked about between perception and reality, as politicians and banksters try to sell a false perception and people fight to learn about the truth and reality, it's going to cause markets to be very volatile and move all over the place.
All right. J.S. Kim of SmartKnowledgeU.com. That's all the time we have. Thanks so much for being on The Edge.
My pleasure, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of On The Edge with me, Max Kaiser. I want to thank my guest, J.S. Kim of SmartKnowledgeU.com. If you want to send me an email, please do so at ontheedgeofpresstv.com. Until next time, Max Kaiser saying bye, y'all.